Chapter 40. Researching item stats. Again, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Alright, now I'm going to explain to you the effects of these two daggers. You've got to understand and remember them, so that when you use them in combat later, you'll know exactly what to do. Bai Yunfei then carefully explained the effects of the two daggers to Li Qingfeng. After making sure that the latter had understood and remembered them, he put the dagger in his hand away and replaced it with a +8 normal dagger, saying, "Let's test their effects in detail now. There are still some things I don't understand. I need to study them more carefully." "Oh, then how do we test them?" Li Qingfeng nodded repeatedly and asked expectantly. "There's no need to fight or something. We'll only research its effects. I'll use this dagger to defend and you'll attack me with the dagger in your hand. Just do it slowly. You should already understand this, right? I remember when we were testing the brick last time, you quite enjoyed hitting me with it." "Haha, I already know what to do, let's get started." Li Qingfeng laughed in an embarrassed manner and said. "Yeah, let's begin." Li Qingfeng raised his dagger and slowly brought it down towards Bai Yunfei. Bai Yunfei also raised the dagger in his hand and blocked this attack from him. Use a little less force. Let's continue." Bai Yunfei looked at the nick that had just appeared on the blade because of the collision and warned. The two daggers then hit each other this way about a dozen times. The dagger in Bai Yunfei's hand was already full of nicks. After all, the dagger in Li Qingfeng's hand towered over it in terms of damage. Another slight sound of collision was heard. Bai Yunfei subconsciously wanted to say, "It still hasn't come, continue." Only, when he had just opened his mouth and these words had yet to come out of it, everything before his eyes turned black and he could no longer see anything. Blinding. After being stupefied for a second, Bai Yunfei reacted instantly by shouting, "Stop." In fact, Li Qingfeng had noticed it as soon as this effect had been activated because at that moment, a strand of his soul force had flowed into the dagger uncontrollably. Bai Yunfei did not channel his soul force to resist. Instead, he carefully experienced this blind state. 3 seconds passed very quickly. The light reappeared and the world in front of him returned to normal. "How was it, Yunfei? Just now it was the blinding effect, right?" Seeing that the dagger in Bai Yunfei's hand had remained unchanged, Li Qingfeng knew that the triggered effect should have been blinding. "Yeah, you're right. It was the blinding effect. The whole world suddenly turned into darkness and I couldn't see anything, but the other senses were left intact." Bai Yunfei carefully recalled the feeling just then. This effect is exceptionally useful. If such a situation suddenly occurs during combat. Let's continue. We'll test that severing effect now. Bai Yunfei thought for a while and said. After another dozen collisions, the moment the two daggers hit each other again, Li Qingfeng had a happy expression, saying, "Here it comes." Almost at the same time as he said those words, Bai Yunfei felt his hand lighten. The moment the two daggers had come into contact, there had been no sound of collision at all. The dagger in Li Qingfeng's hand had completely cut through the dagger used to block by Bai Yunfei at one stroke as if cutting through a piece of tofu. Li Qingfeng looked at the dagger in his hand then at the fallen half of the blade on the ground in a somewhat stupefied manner and murmured, "This is the severing effect. It cuts through the opponent's weapon directly." Bai Yunfei looked at the half of the dagger in his hand. The cut surface of the blade was smooth. Obviously the dagger had been cut in half without hindrance. This +12 additional effect is really terrifying. Severing. Though it's hard to trigger if the enemy's weapon is of high grade, only inheritance grade equipment and above can prevent it from being triggered completely. In other words, it can sever all the soul armaments of the same grade as the glacial piercer as well. Afterwards, the two of them began to test the effects of the other +12 dagger. During the test, when Li Qingfeng thrust his dagger out and activated the illusion effect, Bai Yunfei saw obviously that the dagger was aimed at his heart. But when it was about to reach him, it was aimed at his stomach. The illusion effect made the opponent see an illusory strike as a real strike, confusing the opponent's vision, allowing the user to attack another place by surprise. As for the other effect, namely, in downward attacks using the tip of the blade, damage is doubled, it was self-explanatory, so they did not have to specifically do extra research on it. The two of them tested the effects again and again in that vacant area for an entire morning. Only when they had understood all the effects completely did they stop. I've made my decision. These two daggers will be called Severing and Illusion respectively. Sitting on the ground, Li Qingfeng looked at the two daggers in his hand and said all of a sudden. Haha, they are yours, of course you're the one to name them. Did you choose their names according to their effects? Yeah, pretty good names. Bai Yunfei laughed and said with a nod on one side. Yunfei, you're really terrific. How did you do this? Even the sharpness of these daggers has been improved by God knows how much compared to before, not to mention those marvelous effects. Caressing the two daggers in his hands admiringly, Li Qingfeng could not help sighing with emotion. Yeah, the damages of these two daggers are almost comparable to that of the non-upgraded glacial piercer, which means they should have already reached the threshold of soul armaments. However, I'm not sure if they can actually be counted as soul armaments or not. After all, now I still don't know much about soul armaments. At this point, seeming to think of something, Bai Yunfei took out an space ring, held it out to Li Qingfeng and said, take your space ring. I upgraded it a bit too. But I didn't upgrade it to the point where an additional effect would appear because if I had tried and failed, it would have been destroyed for nothing. Li Qingfeng received the ring and said doubtfully, this one can also be upgraded. Just put it on and experience it a bit. Bai Yunfei laughed and suggested that he experienced it himself. The moment Li Qingfeng put the ring on his finger, he was obviously stupefied. Afterwards, he looked at his own body and at the ring on his finger somewhat doubtfully. Then he turned to Bai Yunfei and said with uncertainty, Yunfei, why am I feeling? You're feeling that your body is lighter and lither than before, right? Bai Yunfei said smilingly, your feeling is not wrong at all. The rings I upgrade won't provide additional damage or defense, but they will increase the body's attributes. The one on my finger increases strength, and yours increases agility. After Bai Yunfei had upgraded this space ring of Li Qingfeng's to +8, its additional attribute was an increase of 18 points to agility. Though the number of additional points is not large, something is still better than nothing. Too bad I don't have time, otherwise I'd still be able to experiment a bit with the attributes of various kinds of jewelry after they are upgraded to high levels. Bai Yunfei said with some regret. When Li Qingfeng heard these words, his expression immediately darkened. He said, you're prepared to go. When? Bai Yunfei thought for a while and said, tomorrow. I'll have a good rest tonight and leave tomorrow morning. You're not going to say something to the people in the village? No, I'm not. There's no need to disturb them. I don't like a farewell scene with too many people. Bai Yunfei shook his head, after I leave, you must warn the people in the village that, if the Zhang family's men come and ask questions, they must not show any weak points and must act as if they don't know me. Yeah, I got it. Don't worry. Everybody has the previous experience of dealing with people who come here to probe, so there won't be any problem. Chapter 41. Leave, peril is coming. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At night, Bai Yunfei was lying on the bed, carefully summing up the information about the upgrade technique he had obtained in the last few days. When the upgraded equipment reaches levels +10, +12 and +13, they will gain an additional effect respectively. Even though the one reaching +13 is just a brick, because the previous two levels always come with an additional effect each, I think when an equipment reaches level +13, another effect will be added to it. From 10 to 12 is a step, but when it reaches 13, an additional effect will appear right away. Doesn't this mean that from level 13 onwards, every time the equipment reaches the next level, it will gain an additional effect? But now I really don't have the ability to test this conjecture. It's already so difficult to upgrade an equipment to +13. Upon reaching +12 and +13, a non-soul weapon's additional damage will increase almost exponentially. I wonder if the same thing happens to soul armaments or not. Alas, now I can only make guesses because I don't have so many soul armaments to test them. My Ice Soul silver needles were destroyed before I could even use them once. There are also those various additional effects. They are definitely not always effective, especially the ones come with durations. If the opponent is powerful, he can totally recover before these periods of time end. For the moment, I can only gain these bits of information. In the short term, I won't have time to research in this way again. Tomorrow I'm starting to wander the outside world. Bai Yunfei sat up and took out a dagger from his interspatial ring. There are still 10-something daggers left. They should be just enough for my soul force to be used up once more. Then, let's break through this final barrier to reach the middle soul warrior stage tonight. Upgrade. In the early morning of the next day, when the first strand of sunlight stroked his face, Bai Yunfei opened his eyes slowly. He sat up, raised his right hand in front of him and clenched his fist, his eyes showing a satisfied expression. Middle Soul Warrior Stage. I've already made every preparation possible. Zhang family. It doesn't matter how great your influence is, it won't be so easy to catch me. Outside the village, on a hillside, Bai Yunfei looked at Li Qingfeng and linger in front of him in silence for a long time before saying, "Let's not say more goodbyes, so that we won't get emotional. Qingfeng, I believe one day we'll eventually meet each other again. Both of us will make names for ourselves in the big world outside." Li Qingfeng kept silent for a while, then said with a forced smile, "All right, then I won't say much either. Yunfei, you must take care of yourself and make a name for yourself a bit early. Later I'll wander the outside world with Linger. If we can't manage it, we'll go and seek refuge with you." Bai Yunfei took another look at that tranquil hamlet in the distance, took a breath softly, exhaled slowly, then said smilingly to the two of them again, "Then I'm leaving now." After saying so, he turned around and strode away without further hesitation. Watching Bai Yunfei's silhouette gradually going away, Linger turned to one side and asked Li Qingfeng somewhat doubtfully, "Brother Xiaofeng, did Brother Yunfei run into some problem? Where does he want to go? Why didn't he stay here and let us help him?" Li Qingfeng was also watching Bai Yunfei's silhouette with a somewhat complicated expression. After keeping silent for a long time, he sighed gently, withdrew his eyes and stroked Linger's beautiful hair lovingly. Yunfei has his own decisions. He won't change his mind because of other people. Besides, such a small place as Azure Cloud Province can tie him down. Now he has run into a small problem, but I believe he'll definitely get through this safely. The outside world is splendid and the vast sky is limitless. Eventually they'll let him fly at will like a white cloud. The crafting school was located in Great Plains Province in the north of the Sky Soul continent. The Great Plains Province was separated from Azure Cloud Province by another province called Northern Cliff Province, so there was an extremely long way to go. After leaving the village, Bai Yunfei immediately headed north. In order to avoid those men from the Zhang family who were looking for him everywhere, he only followed mountainous paths, tramping over mountains and through ravines, hoping that he could get out of Azure Cloud Province in the best-case scenario, namely without being detected. However, he also knew that this was almost impossible. In terms of finding ways alone, he would have to frequently go to populated places to ask questions so that he would not go in the wrong direction, not to mention he would have to replenish the various daily life necessities in his interspatial ring. Alas, it is quite troublesome to have a slightly poor sense of direction. After 3 days like this, with Bai Yunfei practicing the wave-treading steps along the way, he had already gone a very long way. Having crossed a wooded mountain top, Bai Yunfei climbed up a large tree and looked around. His eyes suddenly brightened. He then jumped down with a happy expression and scurried towards the foot of the mountain. I've finally found a place with a lot of people. Judging from its size, it should be a town. Let's stay there for a night to have a good rest, eat some tasty foods and conveniently ask for direction. However, when he had just run away a short distance, he slowed down abruptly with a thoughtful expression. However, I don't know if the Zhang family's forces are present in that town or not. But this place is very far from Talis City. Plus, it's a remote place, so they shouldn't be there. I won't stroll around outside and will only find a hotel to rest for a night then leave tomorrow. Yeah, there shouldn't be any problem. After making his decision, he sped up again without hesitation heading for that small town not far up ahead. In the evening in the town of Old Well, on a bustling street of the small town, a youngster who looked travel-worn and weary was going slowly with his head slightly lowered, making it impossible for other people to see his face clearly. He was looking around in a seemingly curious yet actually alert manner. After quickly buying the necessary goods and materials from various business shops, Bai Yunfei went to the only hotel in town. In the rather spacious hall of the Happy Arrival Hotel, a few customers were sitting at several tables. As soon as the servant standing at the counter saw a visitor come in, he ran up solicitously and said with a big smile, "Welcome, sir. May I ask if you stop for a meal or to stay in the hotel?" Bai Yunfei cast a look at him then lowered his head and walked towards a table in a corner while telling him, "I'm here for both. Bring me all the best foods in your hotel and prepare a room for me. I'll rest in there after having dinner." When he finished talking, he had already walked up to that corner. He then sat down on a stool and did not talk again, putting up an unsociable facade. The servant looked at Bai Yunfei doubtfully several times, seeming to have rarely seen such a strange guest. Bai Yunfei frowned and said discontentedly, "Why are you still there?" "Ah, yes. Yes. Please wait a minute, sir. Your food will be ready very soon," the servant said repeatedly. It seemed that only now did he react. Bai Yunfei touched his stomach, which had already begun to protest, and thought in his mind, "I can finally eat a good meal." Sir." A shout rang out in front of him. Bai Yunfei was surprised for a moment. As he lifted his eyes and looked, he saw that the servant had turned around and come back. "What's up?" "Sir, I just want to ask if you need a jar of wine." The servant bowed in an ingratiating manner and looked at Bai Yunfei with a broad smile. "Our hotel's vintage newer Hong has a mellow taste and a fair price. It will definitely satisfy you, sir." Bai Yunfei was surprised. The first and the only time he had drunk wine had been when he had paid a visit to Uncle Wu's grave that night. It was during that time that his soul force awakened completely, turning him into a soul cultivator. "Whatever. Just bring me a jar then. But quickly get me the food first." Bai Yunfei did not mind either and said casually, "All right. Please wait a minute, sir. Your food will come very soon." After returning to the counter, the servant whispered to the innkeeper behind it. It seemed he was reporting on the food and drink the guest had ordered to his boss. However, Bai Yunfei, who had lowered his head because he did not want to be noticed by other people, did not notice that after the innkeeper heard the servant's words, his expression changed slightly. He glanced at Bai Yunfei in an unnoticeable manner then took out a portrait from under the counter and secretly compared him with it. Chapter 42. I've been tricked. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 42. I've been tricked. Book 1 Chapter 42. I've been tricked. This hotel was rather efficient. Bai Yunfei only had to wait for a while before various foods were brought to him one after another. Holding a big bowl of cooked rice, Bai Yunfei began to eat quickly almost to the point of wolfing the foods down. When he was eating with gusto, he saw that waiter come with a jar of wine. After putting it in front of Bai Yunfei, the waiter said ingratiatingly, "Sir, here is your wine." Bai Yunfei picked up a piece of meat, put it in his mouth then took 2 mouthfuls of rice and said indistinctly, "Oh, just put it there." After saying so, he continued to wipe out the food on the table without caring about the waiter. The waiter did not leave right away. Instead, he filled a bowl with wine for Bai Yunfei solicitously and said respectfully, "Sir, since the way you eat is so generous, you must be a sympathetic man. I've always admired the heroes who eat big and drink big like you the most. Sir, please allow me to show you my respect with a bowl." "Eat and drink what? I'm not a Liangshan bandit." Finding what he said laughable, Bai Yunfei could not help blurting out. "What? Liangshan?" the waiter asked doubtfully. "Air. Cut the crap. Quickly go and mind your own business. Just put the wine there. When I want to drink it, I'll drink it. Don't disturb me when I'm eating." Bai Yunfei's movements paused for a moment, then he said impatiently. However, he was thinking to himself doubtfully, "Liangshan. What is that? How could I have blurted out these words? This must be because of those strange memories in my mind acting up." That servant's expression froze for a moment and his eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. But he returned to normal immediately and said, "Please enjoy your meal," before retreating. Only after eating 3 big bowls of rice in a row did Bai Yunfei begin to slow down. And only after eating another 2 bowls of rice did he feel that this was just about enough. Now he was already 80% full. A soul cultivator's appetite was really unusual. After he had become powerful, he had found himself becoming increasingly more able to eat, and he had guessed that this could have something to do with his high consumption of energy. However, if he wanted, he could go on for 2 or 3 days with just some water without eating anything, and this would not affect him much either. Having nearly eaten his fill, only now did Bai Yunfei remember that there was still a jar of wine off to one side. Lifting that already full bowl of wine, he gave it a slight sniff and felt that it was a bit pungent, but a mellow scent indeed floated into his nose. After hesitating for a while, eventually he still held the bowl at his mouth with a bit of curiosity. That innkeeper and that servant in fact had been paying careful attention to Bai Yunfei's movements from behind the counter. Previously, when they saw that he had only been eating the foods without touching the bowl of wine on one side, they were both worried inside. Damn it, could it be this man doesn't like wine? If I had known this earlier, I would have drugged the foods. The innkeeper, either consciously or unconsciously, cast a look at Bai Yunfei and said to himself in a low voice. This drug must be mixed into water to be able to affect him in the fastest way possible. Boss, let's continue to wait. He already ordered the wine, so he'll definitely drink it. The servant said in a low voice, then quietly took a look at Bai Yunfei and said with pleasant surprise, "You see, boss, he's about to drink it." Seeing Bai Yunfei finally raise the bowl of wine, both of them secretly let out sighs of relief, then could not help getting somewhat nervous again. Bai Yunfei tilted the bowl a bit and took a mouthful of wine. He immediately felt as if a flame had slid into his stomach from his throat. There was unexpectedly a scorching sensation burning in his chest, causing his expression to become very unsightly. He put the bowl down at once and drank several mouthfuls of soup continuously. Only now did he feel much better, but his face gradually reddened. The innkeeper and the servant were dumbfounded immediately. This man unexpectedly cannot drink wine. Bai Yunfei looked at that bowl of wine on the table, shook his head and mumbled, "Alas, I was too agitated that evening, so I couldn't even remember this is what wine tastes like. It's not very good. Why do so many people like to drink it?" Afterwards, he did not touch it anymore and continued to eat the foods leisurely. He intended to fill the remaining 20% of his stomach, then go and have a good rest. Oh! Why does it feel a bit wrong? After eating for a while, Bai Yunfei suddenly had a vague feeling that something was amiss. My head seems a bit dizzy. What's going on? Am I too tired? Bai Yunfei shook his head doubtfully and decided to go into his guest room to sleep. However, as soon as he lifted his head slightly, his heart froze a bit. All the people who had been eating their meals at the several tables in the hall had unexpectedly left at some point. Now, aside from the innkeeper and the servant behind that counter, he was the only person in the entire hall. This is wrong, this is wrong. I've got a situation. Bai Yunfei patted his dizzy head gently. At first I was obviously alright, then. The wine. But I only drank a bit of wine, how can it make me so dizzy? Right, that waiter. Was quite strange. It seemed he was afraid that I wouldn't drink this wine. Add to that the situation in the surroundings at the moment, why do I have a vague feeling of familiarity with this in my heart? This is bad, I've been tricked. Bai Yunfei was frightened inside. But when he had just understood his current situation, a loud shout rang out from the place of the counter. He's already found out. Come out quickly. Catch him. As soon as the innkeeper finished shouting, a large group of men with weapons in their hands rushed in from the kitchen on one side and from outside the entrance, then surrounded Bai Yunfei. After confirming Bai Yunfei's identity earlier, the innkeeper had immediately informed these men of this and they had rushed over quietly. At first they had planned to wait until Bai Yunfei had drunk all the wine and the drug had taken effect to tie him up directly. However, Bai Yunfei unexpectedly did not drink and only consumed a little bit of the wine before he stopped touching it. When that tiny amount of drug took effect, Bai Yunfei also noticed the abnormal situation, therefore that innkeeper had no choice but to call everybody out. Bai Yunfei only panicked for a moment in the beginning. By the time those men rushed out, he had already calmed down. He secretly channeled his soul force to dispel that slightly unwell feeling in his head. At the same time, he cast a look at the situation around very quickly. 30-something men were surrounding him and they all looked quite strong. At least they could be considered experts among ordinary people. The leader was a man about 30 years old with small eyes. He was none other than Zhao Ping, one of Zhang Zhinshan's competent subordinates and a mid-stage soul personage. He looked at Bai Yunfei, his eyes flashing with a hint of astuteness, and shouted loudly, "He's drunk some of the drug already. Don't give him time to recover. Catch him right away." However, the moment he shouted, Bai Yunfei let out a cold snort and unexpectedly took the initiative by charging towards him before the other people could act. Bai Yunfei was extremely fast. When Zhao Ping finished talking, he was already about to charge up to his face. His expression changing greatly, Zhao Ping retreated hurriedly and drew a short sword about 2 feet long at the same time. Without hesitation, he thrust it at Bai Yunfei. Bai Yunfei swung his right hand upwards. When it went up, it was already holding a small and exquisite dagger. With a loud and clear ding, the dagger warded off the incoming short sword. Just when he wanted to make another move, he suddenly noticed something happening beside him. A large saber was being swung at his extended right arm. It turned out someone on the side had reacted by starting to attack him. Bai Yunfei had no choice but to halt for a moment and withdraw his right hand to avoid this saber strike. He had not expected these men to be able to cooperate with each other so well tacitly. Almost at the same time as that large saber was swung at him, Zhao Ping's short sword was thrust at him again. Bai Yunfei had no alternative but to hurriedly back off 2 steps to avoid this attack. However, with this backward movement, he retreated into these men's encirclement again. Chapter 43. Fleeing and Worrying. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That feeling of dizziness in his head slowed down Bai Yunfei's movement slightly. In a moment of carelessness, he was forced back into the encirclement. The captain of this group of men was none other than Zhao Ping. And the dark-skinned man who had reacted earliest just then by swinging his saber at Bai Yunfei was the vice-captain Wei Su, a late-stage soul apprentice. After forcing Bai Yunfei to retreat, not giving him a chance to channel his soul force to regain his composure, Zhao Ping shouted loudly again, "Catch him," then took the lead and charged at Bai Yunfei. In his current condition, the fire-tipped spear was unsuitable to be used. Moreover, there was little panic in his heart. Even though the enemy vastly outnumbered him, he had already noticed that they did not have any soul cultivator more powerful than him. He flicked a stool beside him up with his foot and threw it at a batch of men who were charging at him on the left. Taking advantage of when they dodged it, he rushed over at high speed with a push of his feet. These men obviously were all very experienced fighters. They were even several times more formidable than the bandits Bai Yunfei had killed before. Knowing that they would be put at a disadvantage if they let him come near them, they immediately retreated several steps. The men who used long weapons then quickly held their weapons out, blocking Bai Yunfei's way. Bai Yunfei's body halted for a moment. Originally he had wanted to jump out over them, but because some attacks were already coming at him from behind, he had no choice but to turn around to ward them off. After raising his dagger to block Zhao Ping's incoming short sword, he leaned to one side, avoiding a saber hack from Wei Su, and forced him to retreat with a kick. At the same time, he withdrew his hand and grabbed a long spear which was being thrust at him. Blue veins popping out of his right arm, he made a fierce horizontal sweep with the spear, forcing the people who were charging up back. Bai Yunfei shook his head with force. There was already a furious look in his eyes. If he had not been drugged by them, it would not be impossible for him to use all of his power, and so he would not be surrounded like this. After being forced back, Zhao Ping did not stop at all. Holding his short sword, he charged up again. When his sword was about to hack at Bai Yunfei's neck, Bai Yunfei's body suddenly tilted to one side in a strange manner. The moment Bai Yunfei almost hit the ground, he sprung back up like a roly-poly toy. Then he took steps, his legs turning into several blurs. When he turned around, he unexpectedly had already closed in on Zhao Ping. This was none other than the wave-treading steps. Bai Yunfei raised his dagger and thrust it at the midpoint between opponent's eyebrows. Terrified, Zhao Ping hurriedly lifted his sword to block it, but he suddenly felt a pain in his lower abdomen and was sent flying with a kick. Just when Bai Yunfei wanted to chase and attack him, a large saber was swung at him horizontally. He gave a cold snort. In an instant, his body tilted backwards, turning into a bunch of blurs, avoiding several incoming weapons successively. Then he dashed out from among these several men, went straight up to Wei Su's face and threw a punch without pausing at all. After taking a swing with his saber, Wei Su only saw a blur before his eyes. In no time, the opponent went up to his face with an attack that was already about to hit him. In panic, he made a block by raising his large saber and holding it in front of his chest, wanting to ward off this punch with the blade of the saber. Bai Yunfei's eyes flashed with solemnity and blue veins popped out of his right arm. Carrying along short buzzing sounds, his arm hit the blade in an instant. There was a soft crack as the large saber was shattered directly. Before Wei Su could rejoice at having blocked this punch, he was immediately knocked over 1 meter into the air by the punch as if he had been hit by a force of thousands of pounds, then fell down towards the rear of the battlefield. After spouting a mouthful of blood in midair, he fell to the floor and did not move at all. Although he was still alive, he was also powerless to fight again. Overlapping waves art, threefold fist force. Bai Yunfei was in no mood for fighting. Taking advantage of the opportunity created when everybody had frozen with shock because of the strike just then, he took steps continuously, running towards the entrance of the hotel in a blur. Before he could reach the entrance, his way was blocked again by an incoming short sword. This was none other than Zhao Ping, who had been sent flying with a kick by him earlier. Facing an obstructive sword, Bai Yunfei's galloping body suddenly came to a halt in a strange manner. Under the opponent's look of disbelief, it leaned backwards then, with his feet being the center, moved in a semicircle like a round object moving in a bowl. When he stood upright again, he was already on the other side of the short sword. His eyes glittering with coldness, Bai Yunfei swung the dagger in his hand and thrust it at the opponent's heart resolutely. It was simply too late for Zhao Ping to withdraw his sword to make a block, so he had no choice but to clench his teeth and move aside about an inch. He then let out a painful groan as the dagger penetrated straight into his left shoulder. Bai Yunfei's eyes flashed with a hint of disappointment. Casting a quick glance at those men who had now reacted and were charging straight at him, he suddenly lifted his left leg and kicked Zhao Ping in the stomach again. A deep bang rang out. The dagger was pulled out, creating a trail of blood, and Zhao Ping's body was shot towards the men who were chasing up like a cannonball. Those men were immediately thrown into disorder. After sending Zhao Ping flying, Bai Yunfei turned around and rushed out of the door without hesitation. As soon as he set his foot outside, a back blur suddenly shot out from the shadow beside the door without a warning sign, going straight towards him. Frightened, Bai Yunfei hurriedly raised his dagger to his chest. At the same time, he changed his footwork, moving away to one side. That tiny black blur and Bai Yunfei grazed each other. However, it seemingly did not want to attack him at all. When they were passing each other, Bai Yunfei suddenly felt a chill on the back of his right hand, which was being held in front of him. It seemed a small mass of liquid had hit the back of his right hand. The moment he got out of the hotel, he cast a glance backwards and saw that blur fall to the ground. It was unexpectedly a small gray animal looking like a squirrel. All the men in the hotel looked on hopelessly as Bai Yunfei disappeared after several dashes. They then looked at their captain and vice-captain, both of whom were wounded, and looked at each other in blank dismay, not knowing what they should do. Zhao Ping was sitting on the floor with his teeth clenched in a cold sweat. That kick thrown by Bai Yunfei just then had been really powerful. If he was an ordinary man, he would probably have passed out by now. He already got away. Why are you still standing there? Quickly go check Wei Su over. Only after a dozen seconds did Zhao Ping take a deep breath and manage to scold in a raised voice. Seeing his subordinates run over to check Wei Su out like a swarm of bees, Zhao Ping shook his head in a frustrated manner. He then silently channeled his soul force to heal the injuries on his body. At the same time, he sighed to himself in his mind. Alas! I miscalculated. According to the information obtained earlier, this man was obviously just a late-stage soul personage when he killed young master. But now it looks like he's broken through to the soul warrior stage. Having a breakthrough in such a short time, perhaps he was already at the peak of the soul personage stage when he killed young master. He was so difficult to stall. In the entire fight, I could only thrust my sword out a few times. He simply didn't give me a chance to draw him into a dogfight. Plus, the move he injured Wei Su with should have been a soul skill. And that ghost-like body maneuvering skill was a soul skill too. He's obviously powerful, but he wasn't interested in fighting at all. Though in the end he had a big advantage, he still ran away without hesitation. This man has quite an extraordinary mind too. According to our investigation, 2 months ago he was still a mere commoner. What kind of lucky encounter did he actually have? It will be hard to find him now. After he was tricked and surrounded, we still managed to let him get away. Luckily my tracking gray rat has already left a mark on him, so he won't be able to escape. Now we only need to wait for Master to arrive. Afterwards, we'll just use the tracking gray rat to find out where he is. The tracking gray rat's saliva is effective for 3 days. A courier pigeon was already released. Given Master's speed, he should arrive tomorrow evening. That man definitely doesn't know about this, so after running away for a day at most, he'll relax his vigilance. And then Master will have enough time to catch up with him. Not bad. Now looks like this is not a complete failure either. After escaping, Bai Yunfei did not dare to pause at all. Instead, he estimated the directions a bit and ran all the way. Only after running for nearly 4 hours did he finally stop on a bank of a small river. Using the wave-treading steps unceasingly for such a long period had almost exhausted his soul force, so he had no choice but to stop and rest for a while before he could make other plans. In fact, if he had wanted it, all the people in that hotel would have been killed. But he did not know if the enemy had reinforcements or not, so he would have been in more danger if he had stayed in there longer. Moreover, it would have been pointless to kill them all too, therefore right from the beginning he had only wanted to flee. That faint feeling of discomfort in his head had already gone away. Bai Yunfei was sitting on a large rock, silently recovering the soul force he had used. I'm still too inexperienced in the outside world. Who would have thought I would fall into the enemy's trap so easily? Fortunately, I don't drink, otherwise. Recalling that feeling of being drugged, Bai Yunfei still could not help having a trace of retrospective fear. Damn it, just how great is the Zhang family's influence? How can they have so many men in such a small town? Could it be every other town is like this too? Impossible, there are 2 soul cultivators in that group of men. Even if the Zhang family had a greater influence, it would still be impossible for them to send this kind of manpower to every town. This means I was too unlucky. At this point, Bai Yunfei could not help shaking his head in self-derision, feeling rather frustrated. Actually, he indeed was too unlucky to have arrived in this town of Old Well instead of another town. It just so happened that Zhao Ping's group was looking for his whereabouts nearby. After receiving the secret message from that innkeeper, they immediately rushed over. Now that my whereabouts have been exposed, I believe Zhang Jinshan will definitely rush over right away. It's bad. I still can't stop. I must run even farther away. Plus, that small animal at the end of the fight was really quite strange. The liquid left on my hand at the time seems to be its saliva. Why did it want to do this? Bai Yunfei held his right hand before his eyes and observed it carefully under the moonlight, but it seemed totally unchanged. When he put it under his nose and took a sniff, he suddenly frowned. There's a slight odor. Could it be tracking? At this point, Bai Yunfei's expression became unsightly. He stood up and went to the edge of the river, reached out his hands into the water and scrubbed them non-stop. Then he took out his laundry powder and scrubbed them with it again. Only after washing his hands for 10-something minutes and their skin had almost reddened did he stop. He sniffed his right hand again and could no longer detect that strange smell. Only now did Bai Yunfei relax a bit. However, there was still a trace of worry lingering on in his mind. Looks like I'll have to plan even further to be able to escape. Chapter 44. 3 days of tracking and approaching mortal danger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the evening of the next day, in that hotel, Zhang Jinshan was sitting at a table with a frosty expression listening to Zhao Ping, who was quickly giving a report on Bai Yunfei's situation beside him. After he finished listening to the report, Zhang Jinshan felt silent for a while, then suddenly stood up and waved at the tracking gray rat, which was gnawing on a small fruit on the table. The little animal stopped its movements and raised its head to look at Zhang Jinshan. It was obviously somewhat hesitant, but after Zhao Ping verbally urged it a bit, it quickly climbed on Zhang Jinshan's shoulder. Master, do you want to get into action immediately? Zhao Ping could not help saying on one side, to run all the way to this place, you must have used a lot of your soul force. It would be better for you to rest for a while. I can handle myself. Zhang Jinshan frowned slightly and said expressionlessly, then walked out of the hotel without hesitation. Watching Zhang Jinshan's silhouette quickly getting away, Zhao Ping sighed gently and murmured, as a soul sprite, Master should have no problem dealing with a soul cultivator of the soul warrior stage. But I always feel that that man is still hiding something. When we fought last time, he certainly didn't use all his power. Hopefully Master won't lose himself due to his desire for vengeance. Tracking gray rats were first-tier soul beasts, the lowest-ranked soul beasts. They were basically harmless and almost unable to level up, but they were highly valued by some people because they had a special ability, namely tracking. If a target's body was stained with their saliva, then for the next 3 days, no matter where the target run to or hide, they could always find the target's location accurately. Moreover, unless their saliva was washed off with a special liquid medicine, it would be impossible to get rid of it. In less than 3 hours, under the guidance of the tracking gray rat, Zhang Jinshan had arrived at that place on a bank of that small river where Bai Yunfei had taken a rest last night. After arriving at this place, the tracking gray rat suddenly let out low squeaks. Zhang Jinshan halted his steps doubtfully and saw this little animal jump off his shoulder, run to the edge of the river and stop for a while, seemingly unsure about something, then run back and forth in that area. He could even see that its little nose seemed to be twitching again and again. That man was unexpectedly so vigilant. He carefully washed off the tracking gray rat's saliva at this place. Seeing the little animal's behavior, Zhang Jinshan had a somewhat unsightly expression. He gave a cold snort then quietly waited for the gray rat to search. So what if he did that? Without washing himself with that special liquid medicine, he can only make me spend a bit more time at most. It's impossible for him to escape. Sure enough, several minutes later, the tracking gray rat suddenly rushed up along the small river while squeaking excitedly, then trotted on Zhang Jinshan's shoulder again. With a happy expression, Zhang Jinshan dashed in that direction without hesitation. His speed had already reached its maximum. As he moved at full gallop, he created buzzing sounds that could even be heard from very far away in the quiet night. The tracking gray rat on his shoulder was also clutching his collar tightly with its little front paws while curling up into a ball so that it would not be thrown off. Chasing non-stop for an entire night, only in the morning of the next day did Zhang Jinshan stop. After resting for 2 hours and letting the tracking gray rat confirm the direction a bit, he continued to give chase. Only when the sun went down behind the mountains and the moon began to rise did Zhang Jinshan stop again in a grove. He took some food out from his space ring and ate it. At the same time, he recovered his spent soul force. However, now there was already a vague trace of anxiety on his face. Damn it! Just how far away has that man run? He should have run non-stop for a day at most. Seeing that nobody was chasing him, he should have relaxed his vigilance and slowed down. But even though I've been chasing at my top speed, I unexpectedly still haven't found any trace of him. If I miss this opportunity, I don't know when I'll be able to find him again. If he runs out of Azure Cloud Province, it'll be near impossible for me to avenge Yanger. 2 days has already passed. There's only 1 day left. I've got to catch up with him tomorrow no matter what. The next day, which was also the last day of the time limit for the tracking, Zhang Jinshan even gave up rest to chase at full speed with all his might non-stop. In the afternoon, when there was only less than half a day left until the deadline of the tracking, Zhang Jinshan's expression became more anxious. There was already even a tinge of despair on his face. Could it be? I really can't catch up with him. Right at this moment, the tracking gray rat on his shoulder suddenly began to cry in a low tone. Noticing its unusual behavior, Zhang Jinshan hurriedly stopped and looked at it in a slightly nervous manner. The little animal sniffed its nose cautiously, let out 2 cries again and waved its claws gently, seeming to be somewhat excited. We're getting close. I've finally come near that man. Seeing the little animal's behavior, Zhang Jinshan could not help shouting in pleasant surprise. Putting the little animal back on his shoulder, he galloped forwards again. An hour later, when he was climbing over a small mountain, the gray rat suddenly raised the pitch of its cries a lot, appearing especially excited. Zhang Jinshan was delighted inside. He looked down the mountain carefully and saw that on a meadow at the foot of the mountain, a silhouette of a person was running towards a forest up ahead. That person seemed to be a young man. At the moment, even though he was not running at high speed, he was definitely not running slowly either. As Zhang Jinshan looked at this silhouette, his entire body began to tremble slightly, his expression was almost distorted and endless hatred and fury erupted from his eyes. It's him. It's definitely him. Finally, you've let me catch up with you. I won't let you get away. Now pay for the death of my son with your life. That night, after discovering that the enemy might be tracking him, Bai Yunfei ran quickly for 2 whole days. Except for when he had to stop to take a rest, he did not stop at all. Moreover, he did not know if this was a psychological effect or not, but when he sniffed at his right hand again after a period of time, he unexpectedly vaguely noticed that strange odor. This discovery made him worried even more in his mind. Almost every time he stopped, he would scrub his hands non-stop for over 10 minutes, as if this was the only way that could make him feel a bit more at ease. 2 days later, he finally could no longer endure running at high speed day and night. After having a good rest for half a night, he slowed down while continuing to go forwards. It must be said that thanks to using the wave-treading steps unceasingly for 2 days and nights, his mastery of this soul skills had improved at an unimaginable rate. If he had practiced this technique as usual, even though he was not lazy at all, it would have taken him at least 10 days to reach his current level of proficiency with the wave-treading steps. At noon, right after climbing over a mountain, he ate some food then went forwards in this rather large meadow. There was a forest not far up ahead. Bai Yunfei intended to go through this forest to see if he could find a populated place. Looking at this seemingly endless area of grass and trees in front of him, Bai Yunfei almost felt like crying and murmured. This is really... Where am I actually at now? Chapter 45. Go all out. Fight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Looking at this seemingly endless area of grass and trees in front of him, Bai Yunfei almost felt like crying and murmured. This is really... Where am I actually at now? Now he could only be sure that he was indeed heading north, but he had no clue where he was at the moment. He just wanted to go through this forest as quickly as possible and find a populated place to ask for directions. Just when Bai Yunfei was about to use the wave-treading steps to accelerate, his body froze all of a sudden. Seeming to have detected something, he turned around. He saw a tall silhouette of someone running towards him extremely fast from a distance of more than 1,000 meters. That direction is the path I took to come here. This is bad. It's the pursuers. Bai Yunfei's expression changed. He was stunned for just a moment, but that person had come another 100 meters closer to him and now he could see his face vaguely. This man is so fast, almost as fast as I am when using the wave-treading steps to the utmost. Plus, his face looked somewhat familiar. As his mind was racing, suddenly Bai Yunfei's expression changed greatly and there was even shock in his eyes. He could not help blurting out, "It's him. Zhang Yang's father Zhang Jinshan." This shock was not a trivial matter. He even took a step backwards uncontrollably with the first thought in his mind being, turn around and run away. However, he abandoned this idea as soon as it appeared and stared at Zhang Jinshan, who was getting closer and closer to him. Although his expression was still solemn, his eyes were glittering and his mind was working overtime on how he should respond to this. At this point, I can't run away. If I turn around, my aura will be weakened and I'll have already lost half of the mental battle. Afterwards, I'll only be thinking about running away so I won't be able to fight with determination. This will allow the enemy to dictate everything. Turning my back to a pursuing enemy is a bad choice. Be cool, be cool. At that time, the old man from the Fate School said that Zhang Jinshan is an early stage soul sprite. The Soul Sprite stage has the ability to control the natural elements, so the Soul Warrior stage just can't compare with it. How can I possibly beat him? But I don't have to beat him. I only need to injure him, even if I'll be injured in the process too. As long as I still have the ability to run away. As long as I make it impossible for him to pursue me, this will be enough. He wants to kill me, but I only need to grasp an opportunity to run away. In terms of goals, I'm already at a slight advantage. Though I've been running away at such a high speed, he still managed to catch up with me. This means he must have been chasing non-stop day and night, but I just had a full rest. In terms of condition, I'm at another slight advantage. He has to endure the pain of losing his son and is hell-bent on getting revenge, but I can deal with him calmly. In terms of mentality, I'm at a slight advantage again. I've got upgraded items whose effects are inconceivable to him. In terms of weapons, I enjoy another slight advantage. If so, let's go all out. Fight. Several thoughts flashed across his mind. In fact, this only took as long as it would to breathe a few times. When Bai Yunfei made his decision, Zhang Jinshan was already less than 100 meters away from him. Because this was a flat area, making it simply impossible for him to approach the enemy without being detected, at first Zhang Jinshan had thought that Bai Yunfei would run away. He had even been ready to pursue and attack him. However, after noticing him, the enemy unexpectedly did not look like he wanted to run away at all. Could it be he knows that he can't run so he gives up? Or he wants to fight me? As Zhang Jinshan ran fast, the enmity and fury in his eyes intensified. Very good, since he's so cocky, this saves me from having to chase and attack him too. I'll avenge the death of my son right here. Bai Yunfei had a solemn expression. He had already seen that tracking gray rat on Zhang Jinshan's shoulder and immediately understood, it's indeed because of this small animal. When Zhang Jinshan closed in on Bai Yunfei, the animal jumped down from his shoulder and landed on the grass on one side of the path. His eyes glittering, Bai Yunfei reached out his right hand and the fire-tipped spear appeared in his hand. After he channeled his soul force into it, the crimson handle of the spear slightly flashed a red light and a heat wave spread out. Even Zhang Jinshan, who was already just 10 meters away from him, looked a bit surprised by this. Afterwards, Bai Yunfei unexpectedly did not wait for the enemy to come. Instead, he pushed his feet against the ground and rushed up. Without saying a word, he launched his attack immediately. When Bai Yunfei took out the fire-tipped spear, Zhang Jinshan was surprised for a moment because he had heard from Zhao Ping that Bai Yunfei should use daggers, but now he was using a spear and, moreover, it was a soul armament. Given Zhang Jinshan's discernment, he was instantly able to tell that this crimson spear was no ordinary weapon. He was awed inside, but there was no trace of wavering in his heart at all. Since the opponent was merely a soul warrior, he had sincerely never thought that he would be unable to take him down. Even though the enemy had a soul armament, the outcome would still be the same. Facing Bai Yunfei's spear thrust, Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashed with a hint of disdain. Without slowing down his forward charge, he slid his feet, making his body lean to one side, and avoided this strike very easily. Just when he wanted to take 2 steps forwards to close in on the opponent, this spear thrust, which still had some momentum left, was suddenly swept horizontally with the tip of the spear aimed at his throat. Frowning slightly, Zhang Jinshan had no choice but to give up charging forwards. With a step of his right foot, he dashed to one side and leaned backwards at the same time. The tip of the spear then almost grazed his chin. Taking advantage of the moment this spear move ran out of momentum, Zhang Jinshan let out a cold snort and pushed backwards with his right feet. His body suddenly returned to an upright position. At the same time, he reached out his right hand, curled his fingers to form a claw and thrust it at Bai Yunfei's throat. Zhang Jinshan carried out this counterattack extremely fast, bringing his hand to the enemy's throat almost in the blink of an eye, then made a grab with force. But he was only able to grab a trace of a blur. Bai Yunfei simply had not pulled the spear back to make a block. Right after his horizontal spear sweep was avoided, he made the fire-tipped spear disappear by putting it away in his space ring. At the same time, he took steps continuously with his feet, making his body lean backwards as if he had lost his balance. But the moment he was about to hit the ground, his body slid to the right in a strange manner and sprung back to an upright position simultaneously like a roly-poly toy. This was none other than the wave-treading steps. This claw strike had been avoided by Bai Yunfei, but Zhang Jinshan's expression had remained unchanged. The moment Bai Yunfei stood upright again, he made a reverse sweep with his hand, still aiming at the enemy's throat directly. Bai Yunfei's eyes flashed with fierceness. Instead of dodging with the wave-treading steps, he raised his right hand like lightning. A short blue piercer suddenly appeared in his hand and he thrust it straight at the enemy's incoming right claw. Zhang Jinshan's expression changed. It was already too late to withdraw his hand, so he gave a cold snort and slightly leaned his hand to one side. The glacial piercer stabbed against the palm of his hand but unexpectedly could not pierce into it. Instead, it slid away, creating several friction sparks in the process. This time, it was Bai Yunfei whose expression changed, showing a look of worry. Moving his feet continuously, he swayed his body, creating several blurs, and hurriedly backed off 5 or 6 steps, then stared hard at Zhang Jinshan's right hand. Now that hand was unexpectedly wearing a white glove which covered the entire surface of the fist and allowed only the fingertips to be seen. That glove unexpectedly was able to withstand an attack of the glacial piercer without being damaged. It's a soul armament. Moreover, it's of a higher grade than the glacial piercer. After Bai Yunfei retreated, Zhang Jinshan unexpectedly did not chase and attack him. Instead, he was also staring at Bai Yunfei's right hand, or to be exact, staring at the glacial piercer in his hand. There was even more amazement in his eyes than in Bai Yunfei's. He could not help saying in a surprised manner, "Glacial piercer. The glacial piercer is unexpectedly in your hands. Then. You were the one who destroyed the Blackwood stronghold." As soon as these words were said, Bai Yunfei could not help getting stupefied for a moment. He then reacted immediately, his eyes flashing. He knows the glacial piercer. Then. He's related to the Blackwood stronghold. Or I should say, the glacial school is related to the Blackwood stronghold. That's right. The school those bandits mentioned is the glacial school. That Blackwood stronghold was unexpectedly backed by the glacial school. You destroyed the Blackwood stronghold so that I was called back into my school to discuss this matter. Then you took advantage of my absence from Talis City to kill my son. Seeming to have understood everything, Zhang Jinshan said in a mixed tone of amazement and wrath. Ko Bai Yunfei was stupefied for a moment again, his eyes flashing a couple of times, but he was in no mood to explain to the opponent that this cause and effect relationship he had just reasoned out was incorrect, so he slightly curled his lips, saying, "The stronghold was already destroyed, your son is already dead, what's the point of talking about them now? I won't go easy on you just because you guessed right. Humph. You're about to die but you're still acting calm. You've got the glacial piercer, so Han Zhao's gold silk soul armor must be on your body, right? That and the spear you were using earlier. Could it be you think that you can beat me or escape from my hands just because you've got many soul armament? Don't waste time trying to make me waver with your words. I know exactly what to do. But you, just moments ago you attacked me without saying anything, yet now you're talking so much. Why? Oh, let me think. Bai Yunfei said sneeringly, then pretended to ponder for a moment. Could it be you've used too much soul force chasing me all the way to this place? Earlier, you relied on that initial surge of momentum to fight about with me, but you failed to take me down, so now. You want to seize an opportunity to recover your soul force. As soon as he said these words, Zhang Jinshan's expression stiffened. But right at this moment, when a look of amazement appeared in his eyes, Bai Yunfei suddenly gave a laugh. The fire-tipped spear reappeared in his hands. At the same time, he pushed his feet against the ground with force and rushed up to attack first again. The amazement in Zhang Jinshan's eyes lasted only for a moment. Even though the opponent had seen through his ploy, he did not panic at all. Even if he did not recover his soul force, he could still kill the enemy. Bai Yunfei charged up to the opponent's face almost instantaneously. He then thrust his spear out non-stop, creating an area of spear blurs that surrounded the opponent completely. Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashed with a trace of disdain again. He moved his hands continuously. Almost every time he waved his hand, he hit the tip of the spear, even skillfully and easily. This stormy wave of attacks from Bai Yunfei was unexpectedly withstood effortlessly by him. After Zhang Jinshan blocked 10-something attacks in a row, there was more and more disdain in his eyes. When he knocked away the spear yet again, he suddenly caught hold of the front end of the spear with a grab. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he took a step forwards, immediately closing in on Bai Yunfei's face. He then lifted his right hand and threw a palm strike at the enemy's heart. The moment he grabbed the spear's handle, Bai Yunfei's eyes flashed with a tinge of light. When the opponent took a step forwards, he immediately took half a step backwards and twisted the spear forcefully with his right hand, which was holding it. Upon withdrawing the fire-tipped spear, he put it away in his space ring like lightning. Then he raised his right fist. The moment the opponent threw a palm strike at him, blue veins popped out of his right arm. Staring at the opponent's palm, he struck a fierce blow. Overlapping waves art, ninefold fist force. Chapter 46. The Gap in Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Facing this palm strike, which was aimed at his heart, Bai Yunfei suddenly took half a step backwards and clenched his right fist. Blue veins popped out of his arm and he struck a blow. Overlapping waves art, ninefold fist force. However, the moment Bai Yunfei threw this punch, which he had been planning for a long time, in front of him, Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashed with a trace of derision. Just before the fist and the palm could collide with each other, when they were a very short distance apart, this palm suddenly turned into two palms, then four palms, which were respectively aimed at Bai Yunfei's two shoulders, heart and face. Under the astounded look in Bai Yunfei's eyes, the palm strike aimed at his heart and his fist came into contact. But his right fist went straight through this palm, it was an afterimage. Facing the palm strike aimed at his face, Bai Yunfei had no choice but to lean his head to one side hurriedly. Half of this palm then went past his face, this was also an afterimage. Before he could have another reaction, an inconceivably great force already hit his left shoulder, only this palm strike was real. What shocked him even more was that, as this palm strike came into contact with him, in addition to that enormous force of impact, there was also an even more formidable chill rushing into his body. When this chill entered his body, Bai Yunfei even felt that his soul was frozen for a moment. All of this sounds complicated, but in fact it happened and ended in the blink of an eye. Bai Yunfei's right hand was even still maintaining its forward striking position, but his entire body was sent flying backwards like a disconnected kite, almost creating a blur. Humph! Ignorant kid! You think you can fool me just because you're a little smart? Don't overestimate yourself. The derision in Zhang Jinshan's eyes intensified. Just when he wanted to lift his feet to give chase, he suddenly stood still, the expression on his face stiffening then turning into one of disbelief. This was because while in midair after being sent flying, when Bai Yunfei was about to fall to the ground, he did a flip and landed feet first on the ground. Only after bending his knees to a half-crouch position with his hands placed against the ground and sliding backwards 3 or 4 meters was he able to stop. As Bai Yunfei raised his head looking at a totally astounded Zhang Jinshan in front of him, a streak of blood flowed out from a corner of his mouth. He had an urge to spout a mouthful of blood but he suppressed it forcefully. I misjudged it. Am I still really too naive? He's a soul sprite and the head of the Zhang family with so much combat experience. How could it have been so easy for me to trick him? In the end I was tricked by him instead. If not for his attack being inclined towards the centerline of my body and hitting a place that happened to be within the defensive range of the gold silk soul armor, my shoulder could have been crippled. Under the defense of the +10 upgraded gold silk soul armor, I was still injured so seriously. Plus, the most fearsome thing was that chill. If not for the defense of the gold silk soul armor giving me a small gap of time to channel my soul force to resist it, it would probably have gone into my body by now. Then, even if I wouldn't have been frozen all over, my movement speed would have dropped sharply. This is the power of the Soul Warrior stage. The power of elemental control. Now Bai Yunfei had already stood up. He wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth and took out the fire-tipped spear again, then stared hard at Zhang Jinshan in front of him. Zhang Jinshan watched all of this with a lingering astonished and doubtful expression. How is this even possible? After taking that palm strike of mine, it unexpectedly seems he's just slightly injured. Even though I'm not in my best condition, a soul warrior shouldn't have been able to withstand the force of a palm strike from a soul sprite like me so easily. Right. He's wearing Han Zhao's gold silk soul armor on his body. But that armor is merely a low-human tier soul armament, how can it have such a high defense? Could it be? The amount of power I can use at the moment is even lower than I thought. Both men had their own thoughts and seemed to be considering countermeasures. For a short period of time, the situation unexpectedly turned into a deadlock. Bai Yunfei did his utmost to channel his soul force to disperse that trace of coldness in his body. At the same time, he cast a glance at the fire-tipped spear in his hands in an unnoticeable manner, his eyes flashing. I didn't expect to be able to draw the scorching heat in the fire-tipped spear into my body. Just now, to disperse that trace of coldness in my body as quickly as possible, I subconsciously tried doing this and was unexpectedly successful. But I was unable to discover this earlier. In that is the case, it just happens to be of some help in this fight. I can't wait any longer. Both of us are recovering, but he's definitely faster than I am. I must not let him return to his best or I'll be in even more danger. At this point, Bai Yunfei clenched his teeth and gave the fire-tipped spear a shake. Using a strange footwork pattern, he turned into a string of blurs and rushed towards Zhang Jinshan. He saw through me again. He's obviously weaker than me, but he has attacked me first the times in a row. This man's mental ability is indeed exceptional. Watching Bai Yunfei charging at him, Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. He then gave a cold snort and rushed up. Knowing that the opponent was adept at using fists and palms to attack, this time Bai Yunfei watched out for his forceful approach all the time right from the beginning. Relying on the wave-treading step's speed and dexterity, brandishing the spear, he was unexpectedly able to force Zhang Jinshan to retreat every time he wanted to charge up. The fire-tipped spear had an extremely high damage and even an explosion effect, but most of its damage was focused in the tip and it needed to hit the target in straight thrusts for the explosion effect to be triggered. Right from the beginning Zhang Jinshan had been able to tell that this spear was no ordinary weapon, so he did not block the thrusts of the spear head. Unlike how he had blocked the stabs of the glacial piercer earlier. Therefore, even though Bai Yunfei looked very lively as he fought, he was unable to do anything to the opponent at all. The two of them fought for several dozen bouts continuously. Because Zhang Jinshan was afraid of the power of the fire-tipped spear, he was unable to counterattack for the time being, but he handled Bai Yunfei's attacks with skill and ease. However, Bai Yunfei became more and more anxious as the fight progressed. He could already tell that the opponent was deliberately dragging out the fight. If this continued, he would undoubtedly use more energy than the enemy and the situation would become more and more disadvantageous to him. Worried inside, Bai Yunfei could not help attacking much faster. After Zhang Jinshan avoided another spear strike, Bai Yunfei suddenly repositioned his feet, taking half a step backwards and withdrawing the fire-tipped spear. Blue veins popped out of his right arm. It looked like he had exerted his strength in the blink of an eye. He then thrust the spear out all of a sudden at a speed unexpectedly several times greater than earlier. Threefold thrust. Facing this fast spear thrust, which was aimed at his stomach, Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashed with a trace of amazement, but he did not panic at all. The moment the tip of the spear about to come into contact with him, his entire body moved sideways without a warning sign, avoiding this blow easily. Then, with his body slightly leaning forwards, he unexpectedly rushed up to Bai Yunfei's face in the blink of an eye. Without lifting or lowering himself, and without a warning sign, he had moved sideways then rushed up just like that. It even appeared as if he had not made any movement. A body-maneuvering soul skill, ice-treading steps. Using this footwork pattern was like skating on ice. It did not require the user to sway left and right confusingly like the wave-treading steps, nor did it allow the user to move so fast as the wave-treading steps did. It only made it possible for the user to slide without any warning sign and in a surprising manner. When it was in use, the user's body did not rise or fall, so unless you observed by staring at his feet, you would not notice any strange movement, but who would only stare at the opponent's feet during combat. Another focus attack with the spear had been avoided. Before Bai Yunfei could even bemoan this, the enemy had already slid up to his face. His eyes flashing with killing intent, Zhang Jinshan raised his right hand and threw another palm strike, aiming for Bai Yunfei's head. The palm of his hand seemed to be surrounded in a layer of frost. The wind created by the palm spread out, sending a mass of cold air to Bai Yunfei, causing his hair to stand on end. This palm strike was probably even several times more fearsome than that palm strike from earlier. Bai Yunfei's pupils dilated. It was already too late to withdraw the spear, so he clenched his teeth and pushed his feet against the ground with force. His body then suddenly jumped up backwards. Even though he would be in a difficult situation to ward off the enemy's follow-up attack, he had to avoid this palm strike first. Because he jumped up, this palm strike which originally had been aimed at his head was now aimed at his chest instead. With this backward jump, he was able to create a distance of about an inch between him and the palm. It looked like he had eventually avoided this palm strike by a hair's breadth. However, just when this palm seemed to run out of momentum, Zhang Jinshan's eyes focused and he let out a light snort. His right shoulder seemed to tremble slightly, then his entire right arm seemed to wiggle in an unnoticeable manner. In just a moment, this already outstretched right arm unexpectedly became longer by more than 2 inches all of a sudden. Under the astounded look in Bai Yunfei's eyes, this palm hit him squarely in the chest. Chapter 47. Strike Back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just when the incoming palm strike seemed to run out of momentum, that already outstretched right arm unexpectedly became longer by more than 2 inches all of a sudden. Under the astounded look in Bai Yunfei's eyes, this palm hit him squarely in the chest. This is the soul skill long arm fist. It was none other than the low-tier soul skill used by Zhang Yang in the past, who at that time could only lengthen his arm by an inch at most. Now Zhang Jinshan was using it and had made his arm longer by nearly 3 inches. Even though it was a low-level soul skill, its power still varied according to the power of the user. Bai Yunfei's body was once again sent flying with a burst of buzzing sounds. Bai Yunfei did another flip while in midair and landed on the ground. However, this time his actions were performed in a much more helter-skelter manner. Only after propping himself up with the fire-tipped spear and sliding another 4 or 5 meters was he finally able to stop. He raised his head. A flush rushed up his face, which looked a bit pale at first. Eventually he could no longer endure it and spouted out a mouthful of blood. Lifting his hand and wiping the bloodstains off the corners of his mouth, Bai Yunfei stared at Zhang Jinshan, who was walking towards him slowly, with a trace of bitterness in his eyes. The gap is too big. We're simply not on the same level, whether in terms of combat experience or technique usage. If he hadn't used too much soul force earlier and become less powerful as a result, those 2 palm strikes alone would have been enough to take me down. Zhang Jinshan put his right hand behind his back and it trembled slightly in an unnoticeable manner. After channeling his soul force to recover from the side effects of forcefully modifying a soul skill, he walked towards Bai Yunfei step by step while saying tauntingly, "What's wrong? Now you already know the gap between us, right? Arrogant ignorant brat, though you've got several soul armament and my power has weakened, I can still kill you with ease. But I won't let you die so easily. You tortured and maimed my son to death, so I'll make you suffer all kinds of torments until you wish you were dead. Then I'll snap your limbs one by one and let you die with a damaged corpse." The more Zhang Jinshan talked, the more agitated he became. Towards the end, he almost shouted the words. His eyes were virtually blood-red and his face was full of ferocity. Only, under that look of hatred in his eyes, there was also a trace of sorrow. Looking at Zhang Jinshan, who seemed to be immersed in madness, Bai Yunfei slowly backed off expressionlessly. However, Zhang Jinshan was advancing even faster, so after just several steps, the 2 of them were already about to stand face to face. While retreating, Bai Yunfei slightly glanced around. All of a sudden, his eyes flashed with a trace of light. He took a deep breath, channeled his soul force and used the wave-treading steps. His body turned into a string of blurs and moved obliquely 2 meters to the left, then halted abruptly. Staring at Zhang Jinshan, who had chased up to a place 3 meters ahead him, he lifted his right foot and threw a fierce kick. The great force of the kick shot a basin-sized rock under his feet along with a layer of dirt towards Zhang Jinshan. Giving a cold snort, Zhang Jinshan immediately moved half a step to the left without rising or lowering his body. However, right after he dashed sideways to avoid this flying rock, his pupils dilated all of a sudden because he saw Bai Yunfei charging up closely after the rock at a speed even faster than that of the rock and thrusting the spear out. The moment that rock flew up to Zhang Jinshan's left side, the tip of Bai Yunfei's spear was already about to reach him. Just when Zhang Jinshan wanted to dodge again, his eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of astonishment. The target of this spear strike was unexpectedly not him, but the rock by his side. Blue veins popped out of Bai Yunfei's right arm, which he was holding the spear with. The various muscles of this arm bulged out greatly in the blink of an eye, raising the thrusting speed of the arm to its maximum. Almost without an interval, he executed 2 spear thrusts continuously. Threefold thrust. Threefold thrust. When the first strike hit the rock, it only shook a bit. However, when the second strike hit it, an explosion suddenly rang out at the moment of contact. Almost at the same time as a trace of surprise appeared in Zhang Jinshan's eyes, this explosion rang out by his side. Under the astounded look in his eyes, a mass of fire burst out from inside the rock. The basin-sized rock then shattered into countless tiny fragments which were shot out in all directions. A rock very close to him had suddenly exploded, sending a heat wave and a large volley of fragments flying at him. The area covered by the rock fragments was so large that Zhang Jinshan did not have enough time to avoid them. He could only use the ice-treading steps at the last moment and quickly slide backwards. At the same time, he crossed his hands, making a block in front of his face, and channeled his soul force to enhance his defense, causing his whole body's skin and muscles to wiggle slightly. A series of cracks was heard. The sharp pains coming from various places on his body astonished Zhang Jinshan even more. Just the rock fragments shot at me are already so powerful. The attack of the rock fragments lasted only for a breath's time. Zhang Jinshan kept backing off. He moved his hands away from in front of his face, but what came into his field of vision was a dazzling red light. Bai Yunfei's eyes glittered with killing intent. The tip of the fire-tipped spear, which was emitting a red light, looking as if it was shrouded in a red fireball, was being thrust straight at Zhang Jinshan. Finally, for the first time there was an expression of shock on Zhang Jinshan's face. This crimson spear was already less than 3 inches away from his chest, so he would not have enough time for him to avoid it while retreating hurriedly. After thinking for a moment, he showed a resolute expression, reached out his left hand in the blink of an eye and held it before his chest. When it came into contact with the tip of the incoming spear, he suddenly caught hold of it in a grab. Then he tilted his palm. Muscles bulging out on his left arm, he pushed it up fiercely at an angle. At the same time, he repositioned his feet, dashing out obliquely in the other direction. Before he could loosen his grip, the tip of the spear slipped in his hand. When he let go of it and hurriedly backed off, a small amount of blood fell down from the air. The shocked expression in Zhang Jinshan's eyes intensified. Without pausing at all, he moved backward several dozen meters in an instant. Only when he saw that Bai Yunfei was not chasing and attacking him did he finally relax and stop there to gasp for air. How is this possible? How is this possible? He's just a mid-stage soul warrior, how can he unleash that kind of attack? Staring hard at Bai Yunfei in front of him, Zhang Jinshan roared in his mind, even if that spear is an earth-tier soul armament, even if it can gather up the element of fire to cause an explosion, he must at least reach the late-stage soul warrior stage to be able to do that. How in the world can he use this kind of attack? Lifting his left hand in front of his eyes, he saw that a long hole had been cut into the high-human tier ice silk glove on it. Underneath the hole in the glove, there was a wound deep to the bone extending from the center of the palm to the intersection of the index and the thumb. Although he had been channeling his soul force to heal it since the first moment, blood was still flowing out non-stop, dyeing that white glove almost completely red. Even worse, there was unexpectedly a faint black color on the wound's opening and a scorching heat was slowly spreading up from this opening. Trying his best, he channeled his glacial energy to resist the heat. Only now did this scorching heat slowly disappear. Zhang Jinshan looked at the wound on his hand, whose bleeding was gradually slowing down, then cast a glance at the fire-tipped spear in Bai Yunfei's hands with a lingering fear. There was unexpectedly a trace of relief in his eyes. Luckily I reacted fast at the last moment. Now I definitely can't let the tip of that spear hit me again. If it causes that kind of explosion when I'm hit by a thrust with it. At this point, a tinge of horror came into being uncontrollably in his heart and he kept looking at the fire-tipped spear in an even more fearful manner. At a place several dozen meters away, Bai Yunfei was pinching his slightly trembling right arm with his left hand. His teeth clenched tightly, he was channeling his soul force non-stop. Only when the acute pain coming from his arm had subsided a bit did he finally let out a sigh of relief. He then also lifted his eyes and stared hard at Zhang Jinshan in front of him. In fact, Bai Yunfei was also feeling lucky that Zhang Jinshan had retreated so far away in fear. If the enemy had counterattacked right after avoiding that thrust of the fire-tipped spear earlier, he would definitely have been in grave danger. Before executing that series of attacks just then, he had already prepared himself for the scenario in which he would fail and could be injured again by the enemy. Too bad, when the last thrust hit his palm, the explosion effect wasn't activated, otherwise I would have already won this fight. When Bai Yunfei saw that the opponent seemed to be treating his injuries, his eyes could not help showing a trace of disappointment. I've used the threefold thrust 3 times and even triggered the explosion effect, but I was only able to injure him slightly. From now on, he'll definitely be even more careful against the fire-tipped spear. If so, will I have no choice but to do that? While Bai Yunfei's mind was working overtime, Zhang Jinshan calmed down. He immediately noticed his strange behavior. He didn't chase and attack me. Plus, he looks. His right arm is injured. Right, it doesn't matter what secret method he used to unleash that kind of attack, since he was merely a soul warrior, this must have taken an extremely great toll on him. Damn it. This means I've wasted an opportunity to strike back. While regretting this in his mind, Zhang Jinshan was unwilling to give the enemy a chance to take a breather. He raised his right fist, his eyes glittered with ferocity, and charged at Bai Yunfei. Chapter 48. Ninefold Fist Force vs Glacial Palm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. While regretting this in his mind, Zhang Jinshan was unwilling to give the enemy a chance to take a breather. He raised his right fist, his eyes glittered with ferocity, and charged at Bai Yunfei. When Bai Yunfei had just made his decision, he saw Zhang Jinshan coming at him first. His expression slightly changing, he shook his right arm, which had almost fully recovered. After taking a deep breath, he charged up holding the spear in his hands. When fighting this time, both of them were obviously much more careful than before. Bai Yunfei had to watch out for the opponent's strange body-maneuvering technique and arms, which could lengthen any time, while Zhang Jinshan was extremely afraid of the fire-tipped spear in Bai Yunfei's hands. He even almost no longer smacked the tip of the spear away with his palms when it was thrust at him. Instead, he dealt with it by dodging. And Bai Yunfei's wave-treading steps also gave him trouble. However, after 20-something bouts, Bai Yunfei was gradually put at a disadvantage again and was hit by several palm strikes from Zhang Jinshan in a row. Luckily, these palm strikes were much less damaging than the earlier palm strikes. As Zhang Jinshan did not have much soul force left, he did not hastily use his elemental force to attack, and Bai Yunfei was protected by the gold silk soul armor too. These were the reasons why Bai Yunfei had been able to cling on until now. Although Bai Yunfei was in a disadvantageous situation, there was no trace of panic on his face at all. While he was defending and attacking, his eyes glittered slightly, looking like he was secretly planning something. Zhang Jinshan lowered his body, avoiding a horizontal sweep of the spear. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he attacked the enemy's legs with a sweep kick. Bai Yunfei retreated half a step with a shake of his body, avoiding this attack. Taking advantage of this moment, Zhang Jinshan did not pause at all after standing up. Using the ice-treading steps, he slid forwards and went up to Bai Yunfei's face in the blink of an eye when Bai Yunfei slightly lost his balance after backing off. Reaching out his right hand, forming a claw, he made another grab at Bai Yunfei's throat. Bai Yunfei had no choice but to lean backwards again, avoiding this claw attack and making the fire-tipped spear disappear simultaneously. Just when he wanted to take the glacial piercer out to fight the enemy with it, in front of him, Zhang Jinshan gave a cold snort and turned his claw into an open palm. At the same time, his arms suddenly became longer by more than 2 inches, throwing a palm strike at Bai Yunfei's left shoulder. The sudden change of moves made it impossible for Bai Yunfei to dodge. He was hit by a palm strike again and his body turned left uncontrollably. At the same time, because he had been retreating just then, now it seemed he could no longer control his balance. He staggered 2 steps and unexpectedly turned his back towards Zhang Jinshan instead of using the wave-treading steps to continue to dodge. Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashing with ferocity, he slightly lifted his right arm and threw a palm strike at Bai Yunfei's back without pausing at all. This was an extremely heavy blow. He was certain that its impact would injure the opponent again and unbalance him even more. As expected, Bai Yunfei let out a grunt and staggered another half step. It looked like he was about to fall to his knees because of being unable to endure this palm's force of impact. The killing intent in Zhang Jinshan's eyes intensified. He took a step forwards without hesitation and slightly halted his right arm at the same time. Almost in an instant, a layer of frost was formed on his right palm. His whole palm unexpectedly changed until it looked as if it was made of ice. Various strands of cold air were spreading out from it, sending a shudder through anyone who would take a look at it. Soul skill, glacial palm. He had used this soul skill in the beginning of the battle as well, but at the time he had only gathered up a small amount of ice elemental force. And the second time he used it, because of Bai Yunfei's dodging, he had to forcefully change it midway into the arm-lengthening fist. This time, when he threw this palm strike, he used up half of his already scarce remaining soul force, after saving it for quite some time. The coldness was intense. Even the air around the palm seemed to be frozen. This palm strike stirred through this area of air to came straight at the back of Bai Yunfei's head with short buzzing sounds. However, he, who was preoccupied with grabbing this opportunity to chase and attack the opponent, did not notice that when Bai Yunfei had been hit by that palm strike earlier, his eyes had flashed with a trace of shrewdness. He also did not notice that Bai Yunfei appeared totally composed after turning around, and that he was hiding a right arm with bulging muscles and popping veins in front of him. The moment he threw this palm strike, Bai Yunfei suddenly stopped leaning forwards. He no longer swayed or staggered. Using his right leg, which was in the front, as the axis, he turned around. His eyes glittering, he stared hard at the incoming palm and struck a blow with his right fist, which also carried buzzing sounds with it. Overlapping waves art, ninefold fist force. Lo, bang. The palm and the fist collided, unexpectedly creating a resounding explosion. Afterwards, both men were sent flying backwards almost simultaneously. While Bai Yunfei was in midair, a trace of a forced smile appeared on the corners of his mouth again. Clenching his teeth, he managed to do a flip. After landing on the ground, he had to take 10-something steps backwards continuously in a shaky manner before being able to steady himself. He had been hit and sent flying 3 times in a row, with each time leaving him in a more difficult situation and forcing him to retreat farther than the previous. This also meant that each time he was injured more severely than the previous. A chill spread up from his fist. Eventually it was stopped by him at his shoulder. His entire right arm was now ghastly pale, looking as if it had been frozen, and he almost could not feel it at all. Bai Yunfei forcefully poured a stream of soul force into his right arm, regaining a little control of it. He opened his right fist slightly. The crimson fire-tipped spear appeared in the blink of an eye and he held it tightly. A scorching heat then surged into his right arm from the handle of the spear. Bai Yunfei's heart immediately relaxed a bit. He did his utmost to control his soul force, channeling it back and forth in his right arm, cooperating with this scorching heat to disperse the chill in his arm. Zhang Jinshan was also sent flying by the impact, but his situation was much better than Bai Yunfei's. He only needed to turn his body a bit while in midair to land steadily on the ground. However, when he raised his head to look at Bai Yunfei in front of him, his eyes were filled with amazement and disbelief, and there was even a trace of bafflement. His entire right arm was trembling non-stop. A piercing pain came up from it. When he had been hit by that punch from Bai Yunfei, at first the force of impact had not been very strong. At least it definitely could not be considered strong to the defense of a soul sprite like him. But right afterwards, wave after wave of fist force suddenly exploded. Just like how a nail was driven into a wall when hit continuously, these waves of force spread out non-stop from the palm of his hand and surged straight up through his arm. Wherever the fist force went through, the muscles and bones of his arm were attacked again and again. 2 or 3 times would have meant nothing at all. 4 or 5 times would have been endurable. But when attacked by 7 or 8 overlapping waves of force while he was focusing his entire mind on the glacial palm, even the body of a soul sprite like him could not withstand it. His whole right arm's muscles were hurting badly as if they were about to snap and the bones seemed to be giving off light crackles. An layer of fine beads of sweat had even appeared on his forehead. This is the soul skill that injured Wei Su according to Zhao Ping, right? This power is at least several times greater than what he described. Zhang Jinshan thought to himself while channeling his soul force to heal the injuries in his arm. Plus, his defense is the most inconceivable thing. Those 2 palm strikes of mine obviously hit him, and judging from the defense he showed earlier, it's simply impossible that he was only affected a bit. Yet he was still able to plot against me, showing signs of defeat on purpose then unleashing that focus attack in the blink of an eye. This means, at least when he took my second palm strike, he already knew that he could resist it without getting injured. Impossible. How did he do that? No matter how amazed Zhang Jinshan was and how he guessed, he could not figure out the answer, because this was a secret that only Bai Yunfei knew. The moment Zhang Jinshan had surprisingly turned his claw into a palm then hit his left shoulder by using the arm-lengthening fist, he indeed had intended to use the wave-treading steps to avoid the next attack, but the moment this idea had appeared in his mind, a strand of soul force had flowed into the gold silk soul armor on his body uncontrollably. Then the force of that palm strike, which was surging into his body, became very weak. Gold silk soul armor's additional effect. When attacked, there is a 5% chance of increasing defense by 50% for 3 seconds. Trigger successful. The effect which he had been waiting for a long time finally appeared. Bai Yunfei was immediately delighted inside. He abandoned the idea of dodging and instead took advantage of the force of this palm strike to pretend that he had lost his balance due to being overwhelmed by the impact. Then he turned around while staggering so that his back faced the enemy. The moment he turned around, he began to focus his energy into his arm. At the same time, he calculated in his mind, 3 seconds. The best chance hasn't come yet. Afterwards, Zhang Jinshan continued to attack without pausing by throwing the second, even more powerful palm strike. The next 3 seconds was the duration of the gold silk soul armor's 50% increase in defense. Zhang Jinshan was fully confident about this second palm strike, but in fact Bai Yunfei did not have to endure too great of an impact force. Then came the glacial palm attack. After focusing his energy for almost 3 seconds, Bai Yunfei counterattacked in a surprising manner and finally injured and knocked back Zhang Jinshan. Had it been someone else comparable to Bai Yunfei in power, nothing unexpected would have happened in relation to the earlier attacks, and this person would definitely have been killed by that palm strike as Zhang Jinshan had expected. However, this series of attacks from Zhang Jinshan, which should have been able to kill the enemy violently, had failed, due to the additional effect of an upgraded item. It was because his opponent was Bai Yunfei. All of these factors had resulted in the current situation in which both men's right arms were seriously injured. Remaining motionless, Bai Yunfei stared at Zhang Jinshan, who was also recovering from injuries, in front of him. When he felt that his right arm's injuries had basically been suppressed, he secretly let out a sigh of relief. For the moment, he just did not have time to heal it carefully. He cast a glance around in an unnoticeable manner while his mind was working overtime. I can't fight anymore. I don't have much soul force left. If I want to use the wave-treading steps to run away, I can't use too much energy again. For every other bout I fight him, I'll be in a bit more danger. Damn it. Though I don't want to abandon it, I have no choice but to do that. Chapter 49. Run Away. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Having made his decision, Bai Yunfei was no longer hesitant. After taking a look at Zhang Jinshan, he suddenly shook his body and rushed towards that forest on the left. Only now do you think about running away? Too late already. As soon as Bai Yunfei moved, Zhang Jinshan noticed this. Upon seeing that the enemy unexpectedly wanted to flee, he gave a cold snort and also rushed out, chasing after Bai Yunfei. However, when Bai Yunfei had just run away 10-something meters, the fire-tipped spear in his hands suddenly disappeared. He then turned around while running and shot 2 streaks of cold light straight at a pursuing Zhang Jinshan with a flick of his right arm like lightning. Flying daggers. The moment the streaks of cold light were shot at him, Zhang Jinshan was a bit surprised to learn that the opponent was also able to use flying daggers. This was indeed somewhat unexpected to him. However, that was all there was to it. Even though Bai Yunfei's attack was surprising, in his eyes, it was still not a threat to him. In the blink of an eye, his body moved sideways, and the 2 daggers went right past him. Zhang Jinshan then continued to rush towards Bai Yunfei without slowing down. But right after he had avoided this attack, 3 other daggers were shot at him one after another. His eyes contracting, Zhang Jinshan moved sideways to the left half an inch again, avoiding the 2 daggers aimed at his right shoulder and head. He then made a forward grab with his right hand and caught hold of the last dagger directly. As he was wearing the ice silk gloves, catching these high-speed incoming daggers was not much different from catching a small rock. Z. Just when Zhang Jinshan curled the corners of his mouth and showed a trace of disdain, a miserable cry of an animal rang out from behind him all of a sudden. His speed dropped and his expression changed. Turning his head around to cast a glance backwards like a flash, he saw that the tracking grey rat, which had been hiding in the distance since the beginning of the fight, had now been nailed to the ground by a dagger, motionless. You! Zhang Jinshan's expression stiffened. Then, with his eyes full of fury, he turned around to look at Bai Yunfei. Channeling his soul force, he charged up at his fastest speed. Zhang Jinshan, I'll return your son's ice soul silver needles to you. When Zhang Jinshan had just taken 2 steps forwards, Bai Yunfei's loud shouts came into his ears. Then he saw the enemy shoot 2 dots of cold light out with a flick of the right hand again. What? His expression changing, Zhang Jinshan wavered a bit in his heart. But as soon as he focused his eyes to take a look, he saw that they were not the ice soul silver needles but 2 ordinary daggers. Humph, it's not so easy to distract me with words. Zhang Jinshan's eyes flashed with a cold light. Without dodging at all, he waved his right hand immediately and caught the 2 daggers, then threw them back. Bai Yunfei bent his waist to avoid the daggers. When he rose, his eyes flashed with a trace of reluctance, which was immediately replaced by determination. Staring at Zhang Jinshan, who had already chased up to a place less than 10 meters away from his back, Bai Yunfei gave a cold snort, then unexpectedly slowed down on purpose. Flicking his right hand non-stop from behind his back, in a breath's time, he shot 4 daggers out almost simultaneously. Right afterwards, his dropping right hand suddenly paused for a moment. Its muscles bulging out, he flicked it with all his might in an even larger movement than when he had thrown the flying daggers earlier. A trace of blue light shot out. Glacial Piercer. His expression remaining unchanged, Xuanhuan waved his right hand, creating an area of blurs and easily knocking down the 4 flying daggers. But just when he wanted to use the ice-treading steps to chase and attack the opponent, the look on his face changed greatly. In the blink of an eye after the flick of Bai Yunfei's hand, a streak of light blue light had almost crossed the distance of less than 10 meters between the two of them and was about to hit him from the front. Fast, it was so fast. This was simply on another level of speed compared to the flying daggers shot at him earlier. There was basically no time for Xuanhuan to do much. He had no choice but to make a block in front of him with his right hand and, at the same time, do his utmost to move his body half an inch to the right. Pooh! A soft deep sound audible only to Xuanhuan came into his ears, but it expanded into a huge explosion in his heart. The moment the glacial piercer had come into contact with the center of his right palm, that high human-tier ice silk glove had unexpectedly been unable to obstruct it in the least. The glacial piercer penetrated into the palm held in front of him without hindrance, then went out through the back of the hand without any decrease in momentum. After that, it pierced into Xuanhuan's right shoulder with another "piu" sound. Even half of the piercer's handle went into his shoulder. In the end, it seemed to get trapped between bones and stopped, leaving a section of its tip sticking out through the back of the shoulder. Bai Yunfei's eyes flashed with a hint of regret. Then, clenching his teeth, he turned around and ran away without hesitation. Xuanhuan watched him turn into a string of blurs running into the forest up ahead, then disappear after several dashes. His body had already stopped moving. There was even a trace of puzzlement in his eyes. As he looked at the perforated palm and the penetrated shoulder, his expression was extremely unsightly. Reaching out his left hand and grasping the glacial piercer in his shoulder, he pulled it out with force. Blood spurted out, but he stopped the bleeding very quickly. After channeling his soul force to heal the wounds in his palm and shoulder, he lifted his eyes again to look in the direction of Bai Yunfei's escape, his expression changing repeatedly. In the end he had no choice but to shake his head in frustration and let out a sigh. I didn't expect to be given so much trouble by a brat of the soul warrior stage. Worse still, in the end I even let him run away. At this point, Xuanhuan shook his head with some self-derision. Was it because I'd used too much soul force? Or because I was preoccupied with taking revenge and underestimated him? After pondering for a while, he shook his head again, talking to himself. No, the main cause was his power and not these things. He's a soul warrior indeed, but his mental ability is much greater than I expected. Though he's a bit inexperienced in real combat and fighting techniques, both his determination and attention to detail are very exceptional. Then, the most important thing is the several soul armaments he got. As he raised the glacial pierce in front of him and recalled the common sense defying things during the whole battle, his eyes gradually showed a look of doubt and disbelief. The crimson spear, the gold silk soul armor, and the glacial piercer. Each of them was so beyond my expectations. That move shouldn't have caused an explosion of the fire element. The attacks that should have been irresistible were suddenly withstood easily by him. And this glacial piercer, in the beginning, I was able to block it using my gloves, but just now. Staring at the glacial piercer, his eyes glittered unceasingly. He was trying hard to recall every single detail of this fight against Bai Yunfei. After a long time, when the wound in his right hand had basically been controlled, he seemed to suddenly remember something. His eyes blazing, he said in surprise, "Wait. This glacial piercer. Could it be?" Seeming to have thought of something that even he himself found ridiculous, his eyes glittered. Eventually, he showed an expression of relief and said to himself, "I'm such a fool. Whether this is true or not, won't I know the answer by checking it out? After saying so, he held the glacial piercer in his hand, then flicked it out forwards. The moment the glacial piercer left his hand, Zhang Zhinshan's face immediately showed a look of astonishment. My soul force was unexpectedly absorbed by it uncontrollably. Then, his eyes suddenly opened wide like balls, staring hard at the glacial piercer, which was flying forwards. He even slightly opened his mouth involuntarily, his face filled with shock. This speed! How is this possible? How is this possible?